Isle of Wight County is home to Virginia's oldest Baptist congregation. Ivor's Mill Swamp Baptist Church was named for an abandoned mill near the Surrey County line.
Well, you know, it wasn't always Mill Swamp. It came from Burley Baptist, and they originally were down on the Burley Plantation, which supposedly is around Burles Bay, down in that area. What it got started really 1704, and they were meeting in homes and all, and they didn't have a pastor, so they sent back to England and told them that they needed a pastor. Well, England sent them 2 pastors. Well, one of them didn't make it. One of them died on the way. And the one that did come, he was there for something like 10 years.
Reverend Robert Norden sailed to Virginia in 1714, become the church's first pastor. He preached at Burley and other churches until his death in 1725. New preachers Casper Mintz and Richard Jones continued to lead the congregation, and in 1729, Reverend Paul Palmer, the father of Free Will Baptists in North Carolina, mentioned the church in one of his letters. There is a comely little church in the Isle of Wight County of about 30 or 40 members, the elder of which is one Richard Jones, a very sensible old gentleman whom I have great love for. By the time of the American Revolutionary War, many church members had moved to North Carolina. Rising tensions in the remaining congregation caused Burley Baptist members to disband. A new church was immediately organized in 1774. The land upon which the church is now sited was deeded to the Baptist Society by Thomas Cofer in 1775. By 1788, Mill Swamp's records include 271 members, 114 white men, 101 white women, and 57 enslaved men and women. The church's influence was far-reaching as mother church of several congregations in Isle of Wight and nearby counties. The first church in the new location was a frame building constructed in 1840. It was repaired and remodeled both in 1895 and 1915. On January 22, 1928, a fire destroyed the church. Reverend J.W. Simmons was living at the parsonage at the time and ran to the church to rescue what he could. The next morning he went to church with his hands bandaged from burns and blisters. The congregation rebuilt quickly. By 1929, the new church building was constructed and dedicated.
When they got ready to rebuild this church, the only thing left standing in the old church were the brick walls. And, well, they condemned those because of the building burning. Well, they got $3,000 from the insurance company for the building. Well, when they got ready to build this church, the church that you see here, it cost $26,000 to build a church. And they they didn't have $26,000. So they ended up paying $10,000 on the $26,000 note, and they built a church. Well, it took them 20 years to pay the other $16,000 off.
Elements of the new structure are still part of the church today, including the cornerstone.
The ceiling is original. These benches were refurbished. The windows are the original windows. They were guaranteed, when they were put in, they were guaranteed for 90 years. Well, we've had them 93 or 94 years, and they're beginning to go. So this year we've had them covered on the outside to preserve them.
The church itself is 2 stories tall and displays classical elements which deviate from the Gothic Revival style of churches during this time period. It has a brick foundation and is clad in brick veneer, while the facade is dominated by a 3-bay portico with fluted Doric columns supporting a pediment. A cemetery is situated to the south containing graves hundreds of years old. Reverend Clark Wiseman added the steeple. It was erected and dedicated in 1980 in gratitude and memory of those who have loved and served the church. In its history, the church has had 54 pastors. Many have overseen improvements to the building, increases in membership, the expansion of ministries, the legacy of community outreach, the promotion of the missionary spirit, and the devotion to the spiritual needs of the congregation. The first pastor of Mill Swamp Baptist Church following its name change was the Reverend David Barrow, who also served as a soldier in George Washington's army. In 1778, while conducting a service on the Nansemond River, a party of men who crossed the river from Chuckatuck plunged him into the water, almost drowning him. Barrow and his ministering brother Edward Mintz ultimately escaped, and for the remainder of his life, Barrow was considered an eminent pioneer preacher among the Baptists of Virginia and Kentucky. Other leaders included the Reverend John W. Ward, who served as a part-time chaplain in the Confederate Army, the Reverend T.B. Shepherd, who delivered one of the centennial addresses at the Portsmouth Association, and Reverend J.L. King served as a camp pastor in Norfolk during World War I. Apple brandy was one of the leading products in the Mill Swamp area. Several pastors and prominent laymen had strong feelings both for and against temperance. Reverend M.E. Broadus is remembered as the one who instilled total temperance within the congregation.
Well, it just so happened that one of these annual meetings, it was brought up that they had bootleggers in some of the churches of the association, and Mill Swamp was one of them, and they wanted it stopped. Well, the pastor, he comes back and he gets the congregation behind him. It took him about a year to convince them, and they told the people in the church, you either got to stop making bootleg whiskey or you got to get out of the church. Well, some of them stopped and some of them left, kept on making bootleg whiskey. But I guess that, who knows, that might be where your 30-gallon Baptists come from. You know, as long as you don't drink over 30 gallons a year, you get to stay in.
Starting in 1929, modernization came to Mill Swamp Baptist. Reverend L.E. Holzbach ushered in a great era of Bible teaching for the congregation and was successful in installing electricity and running water in the church.
When they built the building, it didn't have running water. That was in 1929. They put running water in here and running water in 1942. In 1949, they put a men's and women's bathroom in here. There wasn't a bathroom in here for anybody until 1949. They had what they called a little shack out back.
But despite modernization, sometimes Mother Nature still likes to play her part in the storyline.
In the wintertime, when it would get warm, the wasp would start coming down through the lights, and they would get in the sanctuary. Well, at that time, back in the 50s, early 50s, some of the ladies in the church had fancy hairdos and all. The wasp would try to land in the hairdos, and one wasp would get in here, and the people would stop listening to the preacher and go to watching the wasp. And it would get so bad, the preacher would say, okay, we're going to stop the service, kill the wasp, then we'll go back to the service.
Anniversaries have long been recognized at the church, but under the leadership of Pastor David Anderson, the church began to celebrate its 10-year anniversaries.
Starting in 1964, we started having 10-year anniversaries. We got one coming up again in 2 more years, which will be our 250th anniversary of Mill Swamp.
Pastor Billy Gardner has been on staff for 15 years and has served as a senior pastor since 2018. His faith and his family history have made his tenure here very meaningful.
I think it's awesome because I love history. So I've always been fascinated with history, but to know that this is considered the oldest Baptist congregation in the state of Virginia with its history going back to 1714. And knowing that my grandparents, our great-grandparents had the connections here, but our priority is the gospel of Jesus Christ. So preaching the gospel, getting the gospel message out to anyone and everyone that wants to come here and hear it, and to know that we have a mission to accomplish, I think, that's our priority.